The first instinct is repair. When a career of 30 years stops, your brain doesn't look for a better life. It looks for a patch. It wants to close the gap, stop the bleeding, and get back to normal before the momentum of those 30 years finally grinds to a halt. It feels like a strategy. It feels like being proactive. But after some time in this interval, I've realised that this frantic urgency isn't what it seems. In fact, letting this instinct take the wheel is a very good way to end up exactly where you started, just more exhausted. Because the very thing that made you valuable for 3 decades is the same thing that can trap you here. Our generation, Gen X, is a specific breed. We're the last group raised to understand the guts of things, whether it was a lawnmower, a department budget, or a failing production line. We grew up in a world where you didn't just bin something because a plastic clip snapped. You found a way to make it work. That fixer mentality, that safe pair of hands reputation, is what we built our entire identities on. And that is exactly why this moment is so dangerous. Right now, your brain is treating redundancy like a hardware failure. It's searching for a solution with a level of intensity that feels productive, but it's actually narrowing your vision. I've seen it in myself. You spend your Tuesday morning scouring job boards like you're looking for a discontinued spare part on eBay. You're scanning keywords, checking the posted 24 hours ago filter, feeling that spike of adrenaline every time a notification pings. It feels like you're taking control. But here's where it starts to turn on you. The shorter your runway gets, the more convincing this instinct becomes. It starts to sound like the only right move. Let's be realistic. Sometimes you have to take the job. When the runway, that financial cushion you've built up, gets down to the last few months, the maths changes. In your 50s, you aren't just responsible for yourself. There's the mortgage, the kids in uni, and that quiet, heavy expectation that you are the provider. In that situation, taking the first life raft that floats by has one massive pro. It stops the financial bleeding, it restores the cash flow and buys you time. But we also need to talk about the cons that don't get mentioned during the interview process. When you take a survival hire, a role you're overqualified for, or one that requires a soul crushing commute, you aren't just trading your time for money, you're trading your judgment. A bad job at 30 is a stepping stone. A bad job at 55 is a trap. It drains the physical and mental torque you need to figure out what the next 20 years actually look like. You think, I'll just do it for 6 months. But 6 months in a toxic culture or a dead end role at our age can feel like 5 years. It ages the engine. The danger isn't the job itself, it's what happens to your brain when the runway shortens. When that fuel light comes on, your judgment narrows. You start looking at roles you would have walked away from 5 years ago. You start thinking that any port in a storm is better than staying in the workshop. It's a brutal tension. You're balancing the very real need for a salary against the equally real danger of a hasty repair. On a car, a quick weld on a structural crack might get you home, but it won't hold at 70 on the motorway. Taking the wrong role just because you're worried about running out of petrol often leaves you stranded in a much worse place with a broken engine and no way to call for recovery. And that's exactly how the system baits you into reaching for the life raft. The life raft usually arrives as an offer through an old contact or a headhunter who's seen your CV. It's a role you know instinctively you'll hate. The commute is a slog, maybe an hour and a half each way on the M6 or crawling along the M25. The culture's a step backwards, a place where they're still managed by presenteeism, back-to-back Teams calls and endless spreadsheets. But the fixer in you screams, take it. Why? Because it stops the questions at the family barbecue or down the pub on a Friday night. It fills that white space on the LinkedIn profile that makes you feel so exposed. It's a temporary spare wheel. It gets you moving, but the car is vibrating, and you know it's only a matter of time before something else gives way. But even if your mortgage is paid off, that panic persists. There's a ghost in the machine that doesn't care about your bank balance. When you've been in the system since the late 80s, your identity is baked into your utility. You are what you do. Being between roles feels like a system-wide error. Your brain interprets the lack of a morning alarm as a threat. That's where the adrenaline spike comes from at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. You're standing in the kitchen, the house is quiet, and suddenly you're hit with this wave of misplaced guilt. You feel like you should be at the coalface, even though there is no coalface. This is the moment of recognition. This isn't a strategic necessity, it's a nervous system reflex. It's an old script running on new hardware. It tells you that if you aren't busy, you're failing. But for us, an empty calendar isn't a sign of decay. It's the only time we've ever had to actually look at the chassis. So how do you stop the machine from running that script? Most people will tell you to trust your gut, but your gut is currently screaming in survival mode. The only thing that works is simple recognition. You don't need a 5-step plan. You just need to be able to name what's happening while it's happening. In the same way you'd listen to a strange noise in a boiler and think, that's just the pump cycling. You can look at that wave of anxiety and recognise it for what it is. There it is. That's the repair reflex. That's the runway talking. When you name the mechanism, it loses its power. The temperature in the room drops. You stop being the victim of a panic attack and start being the observer of a process. You aren't drifting because you failed. You're navigating an interval that has its own timeline. If you're weighing up an offer right now that feels just okay, notice the source of the pressure. Is it coming from your bank account? Or is it coming from a need to prove you're still in the game? One of those is a valid reason to take a life raft. The other is just a ghost in the machine trying to get you back into a system that already decommissioned you. I've noticed the picture often looks different after one more night of letting the dust settle. The urgency is usually the first thing to evaporate, and once the noise of the fix dies down, you can finally see the machine for what it actually is. You aren't at the edge of a cliff, you're just in the workshop. The lights are on, the tools are ready, but the engine isn't going back in today, and that's perfectly fine.